Coronaviruses are another group of single-stranded RNA viruses. They get their name from the way they look under the microscope. They look like a corona, like from the sun. So they are also a very common cause of the cold, just like rhinoviruses and adenoviruses. However, there are other coronaviruses that cause significantly more dangerous symptoms, and those coronaviruses include SARS, SARS coronavirus 2, and MERS. These are enveloped viruses, but they are, again, positive sense strand, single-stranded RNA viruses. So here's what they look like under the electron microscope. You can see that corona, like when the sun has a corona. And then you have the viral genetic material surrounded by proteins, surrounded by that envelope. Now, generally, when we talk about an enveloped virus, we would talk about an enveloped virus actually being sensitive to stomach acid. However, some of the glycoproteins that they have in that envelope actually can protect them from stomach acid, allowing them to also be transmitted through the fecal-oral route. And when we were talking about enteroviruses, I mentioned how we can use wastewater surveillance to look for polio. Well, we can also use wastewater surveillance to look for coronaviruses because they can be transmitted through that fecal-oral route. For most coronaviruses, their optimal growth and replication is between 33 and 35 degrees. And just like with the rhinoviruses that we talked about, that is what causes them to be localized to the upper respiratory tract, which is why you would get cold-like symptoms instead of full-body symptoms. What they do is they infect and kill epithelial cells, or ciliated epithelial cells, so those commonly lining the upper respiratory tract, and they're mostly spread by aerosols. Because they cause a cold, the symptoms are very similar to rhinoviruses. However, they have a longer incubation time. So with a coronavirus cold, you've probably been holding on to it longer than with a rhinovirus cold. I don't think any of us are really interested in the cold coronaviruses. I think we're more interested in those more dangerous coronaviruses, including SARS, SARS coronavirus number 2, and MERS. These are cytolytic. Okay. They can replicate at body temperature. That's what makes them more dangerous. They can replicate at body temperature. They are no longer limited to the upper respiratory tract. These are generally zoonotic infections that have jumped from animals into people and then evolve, right, to cause disease and spread from person to person. These are not the type of zoonoses that you have to constantly be exposed to the animal. Once they've made the jump into people, they've made the jump into people. They can infect epithelial cells, lymphocytes, leukocytes, and they cause damage to whatever tissue they can get into, the lungs, the kidney, the liver, the GI tract. So wherever they can get, they can cause damage because they are cytolytic. The first more dangerous coronavirus I want to talk about is SARS coronavirus 1, or sudden acute respiratory syndrome. That's SARS. What we saw with patients with SARS was an atypical type of pneumonia. They had a high temperature, chills, headache, difficulty breathing. 20% of patients developed diarrhea, incubation period of about 10 days, mortality of 10%. The reservoir? We think it's mammals. Which ones? We don't know. So what you can already see here are differences between SARS and the other coronaviruses. You've got pneumonia, so that means lower respiratory tract involvement. You've got a high temperature. You've got chills, so that indicates fever. You've got diarrhea. You've got death. So this is a far more dangerous infection than just a cold. One of the other things that we saw with SARS that was really interesting was these super spreaders. So this is a hotel, I can't remember, I think it's in Hong Kong. I'd have to go back and look it up. But what we had was a primary patient in this room labeled K. So this was the person who was infected. In all of the rooms that are blue, another patient became infected, at least one, sometimes more, depending on how many people were in the room. And then as the epidemiologists went back and sampled, all of the areas in red had positive environmental detection of the SARS coronavirus. So you can see in the hallway outside this patient's room, and then lift is the other word for elevator, in the hall where the elevator was. Now, one interesting, scary, weird thing about SARS is that the outbreak began in 2002. However, it has not been diagnosed in a patient since 2004. So where did it go? Is it gone? Maybe. Did it make that jump into people? It had too high a mortality. People tended to isolate themselves. Everybody in these infected areas wore masks. Is it gone? Maybe. Can I say that for certain? Nope. Because it could be still hiding in some reservoir animal waiting to make that jump again. So here's our death toll and number of cases. China and Hong Kong were most impacted by the virus, but we did have cases in the US and Canada as well. I thought this was really interesting. I went to the Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. a few years back, and they had this whole diagram of basically how SARS spread. So in 2013, scientists found a virus similar to SARS in wild Chinese horseshoe bats. Those might be the reservoir. It became widespread in large cities. So there was a single male patient who infected 69 people in China. One of those patients was in the hotel in Hong Kong, who infected a person who infected 20 people in Vietnam, an additional 63 cases in Vietnam, 143 in a hospital in Hong Kong, 24 people on a flight, Inner Mongolia, an apartment complex in Hong Kong, Singapore, somebody in Canada, again, and more people in a hospital in Hong Kong. So this disease tracking for SARS was really, really well done. So this was a very cool exhibit. If you ever happen to go to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., I recommend checking it out. The next coronavirus is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS. This virus has also been isolated from bats. Here is a diagram of the countries that have had cases of MERS. You see Saudi Arabia is most affected, and South Korea as well. It was first identified in April of 2012 in Saudi Arabia. Since April of 2012, there have been just over 2,600 cases. But what's really interesting about this particular coronavirus is that it has a mortality rate of like 36%. So this is even more deadly than SARS. And SARS already freaked us out because it had a 10% mortality rate. The other thing to note about MERS is even though it is no longer, it's not even close to the most famous coronavirus, which we'll get to in just a second, they are still detecting MERS in patients. So this one has not gone away. It is still circulating in patients, probably in animals, and making that jump. The symptoms going to be very similar to the symptoms of SARS: fever, muscle pain, cough, shortness of breath, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, but it just tends to be more deadly. Okay, I don't know how much I need to tell you about our next virus because you've been living through it, but here it is. SARS coronavirus number 2 causes a disease that we call COVID-19, coronavirus disease in 2019. It emerged from China in late 2019. Patient 0 reported symptoms on December 1st of 2019. The first patient in the United States was diagnosed on January 20th, 2020. By mid-March 2020, you may remember pretty much the entire state was shut down. Other states were a little bit ahead of us. Other states were a little bit behind us, but it got serious really quick. There have been confirmed cases in all countries except North Korea and Turkmenistan. I really don't know much about the politics of Central Asia, so I don't know what's going on in Turkmenistan. But North Korea, let's be real, I'm sure they've had it. They just don't want to say it. These are the data from the World Health Organization, the most recent data I could find. As of March 21st, 2023, there have been over 760 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including nearly 6.9 million deaths. 13 billion vaccine doses have been administered. So there are not 13 billion people on the planet, but remember, some of the most common vaccines required at least 2 doses, and of course booster shots have been recommended as well, so that's why that number is so high. Now this only includes confirmed cases, so for example, if we wanted to add my family in there, we could bring it up to 761, 071, 830, because my family all got COVID, but we didn't report it to the public health department. We just took a rapid test at home. So confirmed cases, and then deaths, just under 7 million. In the US, the total confirmed cases is about 104 million. That's just under a third of the entire US population, with over 1.1 million deaths. And currently, again, most recent data I could find, about 15,000 people are hospitalized, and 54, almost 55 million people have gotten an updated booster dose. So that's low. Okay, so 16.4% of people in the US have gotten an updated booster dose. But if you look at that mortality rate, in the US we're sitting just above 1%, worldwide just under 1%. So this is a far less deadly coronavirus than SARS or MERS, but it is far more contagious, and we really have no idea what the long-term consequences might be for patients who have had COVID-19 and have recovered, but may still experience symptoms down the line. We just don't know. It's too new. So here's our common symptoms. Again, if you've had COVID-19, you've probably experienced this: fever, loss of appetite, tiredness. A lot of patients will experience loss of taste or smell. Sometimes that takes a while to come back. Cough with mucus, muscle aches and pains. And then these are more serious, more severe disease symptoms. Again, this was from the World Health Organization. This came out towards the end of 2021 when the Delta strain was going around. Lots of people can be asymptomatic. So when you think about viral strategy, think about in terms of evolution. This is why evolution is super important for all students to take and understand. Your evolutionary strategy could be to get in and cause a really significant disease like MERS, where you kill a third of the people you've infected, or Ebola, where you kill 90%. Or you could have a strategy where you are going from person to person to person to person, and you rarely cause really severe disease. So evolutionarily, what makes more sense? The ability to infect as many people as possible and to continue to infect them and to possibly reinfect them, or to infect them and kill them. So evolutionarily, it makes a lot of sense. With our coronaviruses, there's really no need to diagnose a cold. We really only attempt to diagnose if we suspect a patient has SARS, MERS, or COVID-19. You can do reverse transcription PCR of respiratory or stool samples because, again, these can be shed in the feces. And you have to do reverse transcription because they are RNA-based viruses. Isolation is difficult and not usually recommended because they are biosafety level 3. Prevention is difficult. You can quarantine or screen patients from infected areas. You can encourage people to wear masks, but clearly we know that that has been an epic failure. For COVID-19, we do have vaccines. Some of the most common are listed here. You have our RNA-based vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, the DNA-based vaccine from Johnson & Johnson, and the protein subunit vaccine from Novavax. There is also an antiviral treatment that you can be prescribed. It's called Paxlovid. Paxlovid is a combination of 2 different drugs. I'm not going to try to pronounce them because I'm going to do it horribly. One is a protease inhibitor that helps to prevent viral replication. The other is a weak protease inhibitor. So why would we put 2 protease inhibitors together, especially when one is weak? Well, what it does really well is it inhibits a type of cytochrome that would normally metabolize the first drug. So really, the second drug allows the first drug to work. And nothing else should be used to treat COVID-19. Please do not buy ivermectin to treat COVID-19. When we talk about parasites, we'll talk about ivermectin. You do not need it. It will not work. It does not cure COVID-19. Paxlovid and vaccination are basically your only options.